If you open the attic at midnight, listen first for the way the house exhales, like a lung releasing a secret. That breath hit me before anything else. Stale air threaded with lavender and rot, a thin, animal ache that seemed to come from the floorboards themselves. I hadn't been back to my grandmother's house since the funeral. I told myself I was only there to clear out the attic, to fold brittle linen, and toss what time had already decided to forget. The truth is smaller and uglier. I wanted something to touch that told me she had been real. The attic smelled of old paper, mothballs, and river-damp wood. My phone torch made little islands of light in the dark. Dust motes turned like miniature moons. The ladder gave a complaining creak when I climbed, and each step felt as if I were walking up through decades of silence. The windows were thick with grime. The moon made a single weak crescent on the far wall. In that light, I saw the trunk first, leather buckled, brass corners greened with age. It sat against the far rafters like a heart that refused to stop. Inside the trunk was a photograph wrapped in yellowing tissue. When I unfolded it, my stomach clenched. The picture was of my grandmother as a young woman. She wore a wedding dress with a high collar and sleeves like a period photograph. But the eyes in the photograph weren't smiling. They were blanched, too bright for paper, as if someone had scraped life out of them. Tucked beneath the photograph was a scrap of fabric, the edge of a veil, brittle and stained with something that might be tea or might be blood. My fingers left tiny, damp impressions on the trunk's dust. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself stories so I could breathe. Then I saw the footprints. Not large, not obvious, but a trail of faint, damp smudges leading from the trunk toward the attic hatch. They were fresh enough to dim the layer of dust like someone had walked through after the house had cooled. I stood frozen, the torch small and ridiculous in my hand, listening for a sound I couldn't name. A whisper drifted down from the rafters, or perhaps it was the house settling. It sounded like a name I hadn't heard in years, spoken with the flattened, patient cadence of someone repeating an answer until a child learns it. The hairs on my arms stood up. I realized, with the slow, terrible clarity of someone remembering a forgotten promise, that whatever I had come to find in the attic might not be content to be found. The first night after the trunk, the house stopped pretending to be empty. At first, it was small things. The guttering of the candle in the hall that wouldn't stay lit, the low thud of someone turning pages in the living room when I knew the book I'd left open had been face down. Then the house started to move closer. I would be standing at the foot of the stairs and feel clear as breath on my cheek, the press of a fabric edge, like a veil, glide past my ear. It left a chill that settled in my bones and the faint, floral sour of something old and wet. I found evidence the next afternoon. A letter, half burned, tucked between the floorboards beneath the trunk. The paper smoldered like it still had heat in its sentences. Someone had tried to cleanse the words, but enough remained. The fury of an unkept promise, the name of a man who had left, and then a line scratched across in a different hand. A name I recognized because I had seen it carved into the underside of the attic trunk as a child, though I swore I never carved it, my own. I remember the motion like a dream now, the blunt edge of a knife biting wood, my mouth tasting iron. Either memory or guilt had rewritten itself into my past. That night, the mirror betrayed me. I stood in the narrow hallway and caught my reflection, a pale face, tired eyes, and behind me, a darker shape. I spun so fast the world smeared, and the hallway was empty, nothing but a smear of moonlight and the crooked shadow of the banister. But the mirror held on to what my body had denied, the outline of a woman in an old dress, the impossible hollowness where eyes should be. She mimed a smile that never reached the glass. My reflection mouthed words I hadn't said. When I touched the mirror, my fingertips felt cold on the other side, as if the glass were a membrane and her hand pressed back. Her methods are intimate. She does not scream from the rafters. She leans into the small cruelties. I woke with the sharp imprint of fingers around my wrist, a bruise in the shape of a ring. Sometimes I find petals in unlikely places, crumpled in my coat pocket, tucked into the seam of my pillow. Once, I opened the fridge and found a single blackened lily laid carefully on a plate. The object logic of the house insists on ceremony. The past unravels in fragments. My dreams are not mine entirely. They fold in a wedding I never attended, a reception where faces blur and someone, maybe me, maybe not, stands and promises devotion. I wake with mud on my shoes that I left on the mat 2 days ago, with the taste of smoke under my tongue. There are moments when I cannot tell whether I am remembering or being remembered. And then, last night, something spoke from my pillow in my own voice, softer than a confession. It said, "You came back on purpose." I woke with my hands tangled in the veil from the trunk, silk threads cool against my skin, and a certainty that the house had not waited for me to start the hunt. I had been summoned. The attic hatch groaned as if someone on the other side was testing the latch. When the attic hatch fell shut behind me that last time, the world thinned to a single small room and the shape of her dress. I tried to laugh, a brittle, useless sound, and the laugh died like a candle under a thumb. The house had learned the architecture of my fear. It folded corridors so I could not find them. It lengthened the hallway until my feet ached. It put my childhood toys in places my adult hands would find them, and then turned them to stone. I pulled the veil from the trunk because it was the only thing that felt like something to do. The silk moved through my fingers as if it were warm, as if it had been worn the night before. When I lifted it to my face, the smell of lilies and old blood filled my head, and a memory I had no right to possess washed over me. The ring, the promise, the sound of someone crying in the dark because a vow had been broken. She came like a certainty. At first, it was only the pressure of her presence at my elbow, then a shape forming in the corner of the attic where moonlight pooled. Her dress hung empty and then not empty, as if the cloth remembered a body beneath it and pulled it into being. I saw the hollows where cheeks had been, the teeth like broken hymnals, the way her mouth moved around words that meant property and apology. I did not run. Something in me, guilt or curiosity, or the last small part of a bargain, kept me there as the final stitch was pulled taut. She showed me my own hands as if I had not known them. The scar that matched the mark on the trunk, the nick on my knuckle from years ago that only I recall, the faint smear of something dark on my thumbnail that would not wash away. The attic grew warmer, then colder, and my breath came out in a single ribbon I could see. She pressed the veil against my face and whispered the name she had waited to hear. In that whisper, I heard the wood under my childhood bed, the voice that taught me to say sorry, the scrape of a knife. Memory folded into the present like paper collapsing in a flame. There was no sudden tearing, no grand thunderclap, only the slow, ceremonial work of wrapping. Her hands were patient. When she touched my wrist again, it was not to bruise, but to bind. The world narrowed to the sound of fabric rubbing fabric and the dull heartbeat in the trunk at my feet. For a long, terrible minute, I thought I could bargain. I thought I might step away and leave the veil to the past. But bargains here are binding in a way a contract never could be. I thought of the photograph, of the eyes in the paper that never smiled, and I realized I had been walking toward this since I first found the trunk. The last thing I saw before the attic took me was the mirror propped against the beam. My reflection was blurred. Behind it, the bride leaned close, and for a fraction of a second, my face lined up with hers. Her mouth opened like a key. I felt a gentle pressure, like a kiss, and then like a lock falling into place. Somewhere below, as if from a different room, the faint, ridiculous sound of an old wedding waltz began to play, slowed and soaked in syrup. The photograph in the trunk develops itself now. You will find it if you come back. Now I'm in the photograph.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.